We want to welcome you to Innovative Learning Group's webinar, Next Steps for Optimizing Your eLearning Toolkit. I'm Seth Vandervlucht, Innovative Learning Group's Business Development Executive. Thrilled to be here today along with Matt Kurtin. Matt's going to be showing us how technology advancements such as mobile learning and cloud-based solutions are impacting e-learning development. Now, before we get started, I'd like to take a few minutes to tell you a bit about Innovative Learning Group. We were founded in 2004 and very excited now going into our 10th year in business. We're located here in Royal Oak, Michigan, and it's kind of a cool, happening city just north of Detroit if you're not familiar with. We're experts in all aspects of training and performance support. We create learning strategies, build curriculum architectures. We do a lot of design and development across all platforms. More and more we're using performance support solutions as well as developing for mobile. What we really care about and what I'd say differentiates us is our focus on getting business results. In other words, helping organizations reach their business goals. As you'll see, we work with a diverse group of medium and large-sized companies across the country, some of which we also serve on a global basis. In short, we can support any learning and performance needs our clients may have. We'd love to talk with you about how we can help your organization. Our contact information will appear at the end of the session. A few notes before we get started. Because of the large number of people attending, we've actually muted the phone lines, so please submit any questions you have for Matt using the chat panel located at the left of your screen. Now, we are recording the session and we'll be posting it on YouTube. Early next week, I'm going to send you the YouTube link along with the slide deck. Immediately following the webinar, you'll receive an email with a link to a short survey. We'd greatly appreciate it if you would complete that for us. Now a little bit about Matt. Matt is ILG's lead programmer and learning technology consultant. He's been with ILG since it opened in 2004. Matt has more than 15 years experience developing e-learning courses, learning management systems, and e-learning strategies. He has authored more than 200 e-learning courses. When he's not programming client projects, Matt's researching the latest development and issues in digital delivery. He's leading ILG's mobile learning strategy and delivery efforts and has developed numerous mobile applications and courses. With that, now I'm going to hand the webinar over to Matt. Matt?
Thank you, Seth. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you today. And I'm really excited to have the chance to talk about next steps for optimizing results from your e-learning software toolkit. I conducted a similar presentation for the e-learning guild about a month ago, and I picked up some things from other sessions there that I've been able to incorporate. So I think this is going to be a really good session. When I attended those sessions, I learned a lot, and I hope that by the end of this session, you'll feel like you've learned a lot too. But more importantly, I'm hoping that you'll feel like you've picked up some information that you can really apply. So with that goal in mind, when I talk about next steps, I'm going to focus on next steps that you could apply soon. In other words, I hope in the next 3 to 6 months instead of further out than that. Now, I do really enjoy speculating about future possibilities, so you're going to see that I've slipped in a few things that are a little bit more forward-looking, but I really do want this to be a practical session that can help you sort out how to take some immediate next steps. Let's get started into our first topic. One thing that can help you optimize your toolkit is selecting the right authoring tools. And I'm going to show you how our delivery method guidelines can help with that. So the purpose of this delivery method guidelines chart is to help you identify delivery methods that are a good match for the knowledge and skill level to be attained through a learning solution. When using this chart, you draw a line from the knowledge and skill levels and the delivery methods with the goal of having the intersection point of the lines end up in the acceptable range. In order for us to have a common terminology, I'm going to begin with some definitions for the learning levels. So if we start with awareness, you can think of awareness level learning as teaching facts and providing some insight into how these are useful in the real world. If we move up to the next level, understanding level learning teaches learners to perform in simple cases. Learners can explain why they're doing what they're doing, and they can identify good examples of performance and begin to approximate the performance. And then at our top level, skill level learning teaches learners to perform competently under a variety of conditions to the level expected in the real world. Now, if you look at the bottom axis, you see the delivery methods. And these are organized from left to right according to the degree of real-time performance and feedback designed into the learning. So I'm going to start with drawing a line here. And if I draw a line over from skill and then down to audio-video presentation, you can see that the points intersect there in the probably not effective range as opposed to the acceptable range or the probably not efficient range. And what this is telling us is that we just really can't be effective with a skill level learning with audio-video presentation. The amount of feedback that you get just isn't enough to accomplish this, so it's not effective. What if I start with learning that aims to achieve awareness, and I go across from awareness and then down to classroom? So now I'm in probably not efficient. The chart is indicating that we can accomplish this learning objective, but it's not efficient to do so. There's other methods that are much less complex that also could achieve this. Now, if I start with awareness, and I go from awareness and then down over to level 1 self-paced, now I'm in the acceptable range, and that means that this delivery method is a good choice for this skill level. One last thing before I leave this slide, you'll see that some of the things across the bottom, instead of being at one point, have an arrow going across, like the job aids and performance support and documentation and reference information. And we have them going across because they're acceptable across a range of learning levels. Now, the delivery method selection guidelines chart defines the learning level as well, but it doesn't define exactly what is meant by each delivery method. And so that's what this chart is showing, giving you the details there. For example, it may be more confusing on things like the difference between level 1 or level 2 or level 3 self-paced training. You'll receive this when you get the slide deck next week, so I'm not going to go into any more detail. This will be better as a reference for you later. Also, if you want more information on the delivery method selection guidelines, you can get it from our Learning Delivery Advisor app or our Delivery Method Selection Guidelines white paper. So I'm going to share my screen for a moment here just so I can show you how that you can find the apps on our website. Start from our home page, and you go into the Tools and Knowledge section and down to ILG Apps. This has a listing of the apps that we've created. These are freely available. The Learning Delivery Advisor is only available at this point for Android with an iOS version expected soon. And then I wanted to show you also, if you first get into the Learning Delivery Advisor, what you could expect to see. First come in, you'll see a View Help and Use App. And then if you drag the app around to where you want it to go, you'll see the results of that. Okay, I've got a question for you. Do you develop e-learning that is for skill, understanding, or awareness? And here you can select all that apply. All right, it looks like most of the results have come in. And I'm seeing that almost everybody is saying understanding, and then followed closely by awareness and about half at skill. And I think that makes sense, kind of what I would expect to see as I've asked this question in the past. There's another thing I'd note here, too, though, is that sometimes your e-learning may have a mix of these. So you might have learning objectives or performance objectives. Maybe some are for awareness and some are for understanding and some are for skill, all in the same course. And so when you're picking your delivery method, you really want to pick it at the objective level, not at the course level. Okay, at this time I'm going to begin a new topic, categorizing authoring tools by capability and complexity. You can see across the top of this chart that it divides into 4 levels, so formatting, authoring, scripting, and programming. And moving from left to right across the tools increase in capability but also complexity. So your simplest, the formatting tools, are best for content presentation. They're simple enough for just about anyone to use. A couple of examples of formatting tools include Microsoft Word and Microsoft PowerPoint. Authoring tools are capable of low to medium levels of interactivity. They allow instructional designers to present content and deliver interactivity without having to write any code. They typically have enough of a learning curve that it takes some time for instructional designers to really become proficient using them. A few examples of authoring tools include tools like Articulate, Captivate, and Lectora. Then scripting tools. These are capable of medium to high levels of interactivity. They require writing code in a scripting language that does not need to be compiled. These tools are complex enough, though, that you need to be fairly experienced as a programmer to really become proficient using them. Some examples of scripting tools include Flash and JavaScript. Finally, we come to the most capable and most complex tools, those in the programming category. Programming tools are capable of medium to high levels of interactivity. They require writing code in a language that does need to be compiled. And these tools are really meant for expert programmers. A couple of examples of programming tools include Java and Objective-C. Now that I've covered all 4 categories, I'd like to describe a couple of ways that you could go wrong when selecting the authoring tools that you're going to use in your organization. If you try to use tools that are not capable enough, the tools will not be effective. For example, you can't use formatting tools to program high levels of interactivity. However, if on the other hand you try to use tools that are too complex, the tools will not be efficient. So you certainly could display content that doesn't have any activity in it, just content presentation using a tool like Objective-C, but it would be really a waste of time when much simpler tools are sufficient. So this parallel between authoring tool categories and delivery methods, the not effective, not efficient, or acceptable, allows us to link the two. Let's see how. And here what I want to do is I just want to review the linkage between awareness level learning and the acceptable e-learning delivery methods, because this is background that you're going to need for the next poll question coming up in just a second. So we saw before that if we're targeting an awareness, then we could accomplish this with a level 1 self-paced course. For this type of learning, learners have little interaction with the instruction other than turning pages and answering test questions. Learners do need feedback about whether they can answer the test questions correctly. So given the information that I've just provided about learning levels and authoring tool categories, what categories of authoring tools are best for e-learning aimed at awareness? Again, you may select all that apply. All right, and it looks like we have the largest response on formatting, followed closely by authoring, and then scripting or programming. So I'd say that tools from either formatting or authoring categories may be appropriate for awareness level learning. Scripting and programming tools could accomplish awareness, but they're not likely efficient. Now, with authoring tools, you could certainly provide feedback to test questions as they're answered. If you choose to use formatting tools instead of authoring tools, maybe you'd approach this in just a less sophisticated way, where the learner answers the questions and then gets feedback by comparing it to answers on a later page. Kind of like the way I used to do homework assignments. You do the practice assignments and then you check the back of the book for the answers. Also, you might have looked at the chart and determined the low end of awareness. You could just use audio-video presentation to get the message across, which that would put you definitely in the formatting category. I had a question come in. Would I consider the Storyline to be a formatting tool or an authoring tool? And I would put that in the authoring tool category because it does require experience to use. You can't just pick it up and start using it. It's a little bit more complex, and it's certainly more capable than what you could do with just formatting tools. It allows an interactivity level that borders even to the high end of what you could do in the authoring tool set. All right, let's return to our chart for a minute here and look at the case where you need to produce learning that gets participants to an understanding level. In this case, we need to be able to do a lot more than simple content presentation. We need to be able to ask learning check and assessment questions, and now it's crucial that the learner be given frequent opportunities to practice with immediate feedback. The best authoring tool categories then for e-learning aimed at understanding are authoring or scripting. So here, formatting tools are not likely effective, and programming tools are not likely efficient. Finally, let's look at the case where you need to produce learning that gets participants to a skill level. In this case, we need to be able to do more than just ask learning check questions and assessment questions. Now, at this level, we may need customized paths through the content. We may need to be able to include simulations or games or virtual worlds. So at this level, the best authoring categories would be scripting and programming tools. And now just the formatting and authoring tools are not effective at what we need to do. So just to summarize, we've mapped a path from the level of skill that your e-learning is aimed at, again, it's a learning objective or performance objective level, to the best categories of authoring tools to use for that objective. So awareness goes best to formatting or authoring, understanding to authoring or scripting, and skill to scripting or programming. What I'm going to do now is turn my attention to looking at some specific authoring tools within these categories. So if we look at authoring tools, again, by capability and complexity of the formatting column, you're probably familiar with these tools, the Word, Acrobat, PowerPoint, and HTML. Just a couple of things to note here. Tools like Word and PowerPoint might be appropriate if you need to have the learner be able to edit the documents after they've received it through your learning. For example, maybe you're providing a template that they need to fill some content into, then that makes sense. But if you don't need that capability to edit, the other tools are likely better because they don't require a purchase program for the learner to use, and they can often be better at compressing content for internet delivery. Another thing I'd point out here is that recent history has shown that open standards like HTML are eventually being adopted more readily, even when proprietary standards are more feature-rich, i.e. Flash. Now I'm going to ask you an open-ended question, and I'd like to have you enter your responses in the chat panel. What are some of the tools that you've used that fall into the authoring category? So I'm seeing Captivate and Articulate and Storyline, all good. I'm seeing Breeze and Camtasia. Some people saying no experience. Lectora's a good one. We're going to talk about more. And some people getting their feet wet in Storyline. Cool. So there's a lot of tools that I'd expect to see here, and a lot of tools that make sense for instructional designers or beginning level programmers. One question just before I leave this slide, just a question, what is Storyline? So Articulate Presenter has been around for quite a while and was based on starting from PowerPoint to Author and then adding interactivity through the Quizmaker or Engage add-on. And Storyline is a new product from Articulate that allows you to start and work right in Storyline and has more interactivity capabilities and more features than what was in the traditional Articulate suite. All right, let's look at the authoring category now. So these are tools that I've used to varying degrees, some on a few projects, and some of these I've used on hundreds of projects. One common thread among many of the tools in the authoring category is that, like I was just talking about, they import content from PowerPoint. So you start your editing in PowerPoint and then do some more work to make it more engaging. Another common thread among these is built-in support for the SCORM and AICC learning standards that dictate how you communicate with your learning management system. And also, these were mostly originally designed and developed to publish to the Flash SWF format. Now, Lectora is a notable exception here. Lectora has a relatively lengthy history of supporting publishing to HTML without Flash. Another standout in this category is Captivate because of its special capabilities related to software simulations and software demonstrations. And version 6 is very good at publishing these to HTML5 without Flash, which is nice for reaching mobile devices. Camtasia also has these capabilities for software simulations and demonstrations. And then we talked about Storyline a little bit, and also Snap and Power. These are tools that are aiming to give instructional designers more capability without having to go all the way over to the scripting category. Now, if you're selecting what tools you're going to use and you're in this category, this is a spot where you need to use some care, because if these tools are used to do the things they're designed to do, they can really be much more efficient than scripting tools. But if you reach too far and you try to do things that these tools are really not designed to do, what may happen is you may accomplish what you're trying to do, but you may not realize that you could have turned it over to an experienced programmer, and with scripting tools, they could have completed it much more efficiently than what you did using the tools that weren't really designed for it. Now I've added the right two columns, scripting and programming tools. Over the last 10 years, I'd say many of the courses that I've developed used Flash or Dreamweaver because the output of these tools are easy to manually adapt to add SCORM and AICC tracking to communicate with the LMS. One of the ways that you could make these tools more efficient is to create reusable templates and apply them across multiple projects. Another option would be to use multiple tools for a blended authoring solution. Now, you might have developed a blended learning solution that was comprised of multiple delivery methods. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about using multiple tools for different parts of a course delivered using a single delivery method. So, for example, you might use Articulate to develop most of a course, but embed interactions developed in Flash in some key spots where a higher level of interactivity is required. And I'm curious, how often do you use a blended authoring tool approach? And this time it's just a select one, so pick what matches best. All right. And so I'm seeing sometimes has about 60 through 64%, and never has about 28%, and usually is down to about 8%. So this is interesting. It's a little bit different than when I asked this for the eLearning Guild. I was seeing more often among the eLearning Guild audience that they were saying usually rather than sometimes. So I'm not sure what the difference might be, but just an interesting note. Okay. So just to return to this chart for a second, we've got a nice looking chart here with options for a wide range of capabilities and complexities, because we can pick whatever we want from all over the chart. We also have instructional designers now have the capability to develop many things that previously required extensive assistance from an expert programmer. We could use templates and blended authoring tool solutions to overcome problems with efficiency or effectiveness. So what more could we possibly want? Seems like we're in kind of a utopia here. Well, Elia Macy's January 2nd article on CLO's website entitled The Future of Mobile Learning says, "Excitement about mobile is leading to hype, not readiness." And in this article, he describes the current state as low level of mobile device use to access learning activities, low level of development of learning assets specifically for mobile devices, moderate to high levels of technology frustration in making learning assets fully viewable and optimized on devices. So that doesn't sound so great. Let's look at some of the reasons that mobile learning has upset the status quo when it comes to tool selection. So many of the top tools historically have produced Flash output, and development of Flash for mobile browsers is no longer supported. Adobe dropped this after Apple and Microsoft refused to allow Flash due to what appears to be, in my mind, a combination of competition for market control and also real technology reasons such as battery life and security. Now, we did have some tools listed, like we said, Lectora, that didn't require Flash output. However, that tool and some others in that category tend to produce output that is designed for a fixed screen size. And if we're developing for mobile, we definitely need to be able to support multiple screen sizes. I find it very interesting that we're at a spot in history where both smaller and larger screens are being touted as features for mobile devices. We have phones that are getting bigger and bigger, while at the same time we have Apple now selling the iPad mini specifically because it's smaller. And I wonder how many of you might have heard of phablets. So a phablet begins with a PH and is named for the cross between a phone and a tablet. These phones have screens larger than 5 inches, and they were featured heavily at this year's Consumer Electronics Show. According to an IHS iSupply report from January 16th, phablet sales are forecasted to reach 60.4 million units this year, up 136% from last year. A couple of other reasons that we need to support multiple screen sizes include developing for organizations that are pursuing a bring-your-own-device philosophy, or the need to produce learning for partners, agents, or customers outside your organization. And one more thing here which is important not to forget. Many mobile devices change from portrait to landscape orientation when rotated, and when that happens, it results in a new screen layout, which is essentially the same as a device of another size as far as your layout is concerned. In short, what we need is responsive design, and traditional authoring tools which don't use Flash don't provide much support for it. Responsive web design means more than just scaling content bigger or smaller, and more than just putting things in a different place on the screen. It means providing an optimal viewing experience based on the screen layout available. Okay, let's take a look at the chart now filled in with some tools that are good for mobile. This authoring tools by capability complexity chart now shows tools that will produce output in HTML that will run well on mobile websites. So let's start with authoring. So again, Lectora will help you definitely be able to avoid dependency on Flash and get you to a mobile website-based solution, but it doesn't do a lot to help with responsive design. Similarly, Captivate and Storyline can publish to HTML5, but both of these have some features that aren't available when published this way, and again, they don't help much with responsive design. If you can move over from the authoring tool category to the scripting category, you can then do things like detect the available screen space and then deliver a different layout to the learner based on the space available. But this forces you into a more complex and more costly solution. Once again, you can try to combat this by creating reusable templates. All right, here's our chart again, this time showing some tools that you could use to produce output in a format that will run in apps. Until recently, Brainshark avoided Flash by converting from PowerPoint to video. They've got a new version that converts from PowerPoint to HTML5. Now, iBooks Author avoids Flash, but then requires you to use iOS. So this isn't really solving a problem for developers who are looking for a cross-platform solution. Now, Flash appears on this chart for the development of apps. This is not an oversight. At least at present, although Flash cannot be used in a mobile browser on iOS, it can be used as a tool to create native apps for iOS. Then we have PhoneGap, and PhoneGap can be used to package a website inside an app so it can be accessed offline. There can be integration between device inputs and the website so the embedded website can react to the accelerometer, etc. There's a version of PhoneGap you can download to do this packaging yourself, and I've done that a number of times, but I found it to be fairly complicated to figure out the first few times, even though I'm an experienced programmer. There's now a new version from Adobe that's an online version called PhoneGap Build, which is much simpler. And with this version, you can upload your website, and the compiling is done all online for you. And so once you load it, it will publish out to all the mobile platforms in a single step. So you get your iOS version, your Android version, your BlackBerry version, Windows Phone, etc. Another question has come in, where would you put Zebra Zaps? I think Zebra Zaps probably falls into the level of complexity that it takes some experience to become very proficient at it, but it could be used certainly by instructional designers. And so it probably falls somewhere in between the authoring and scripting category. All right, let's step back again from specific tools and look at a few general approaches to tackling mobile authoring tools across platforms. So let's start with HTML5. Can it solve all of our problems? So HTML5 is meant to save development time by working across platforms. And I have to say it's very good at that compared to the native device languages like Objective-C, Java, and C#, which if you've built in those languages, they don't work on the other platforms at all. But is HTML5 really a build once, works everywhere solution? So I'd say the answer to that is no. At least as it exists right now, HTML5 can easily become a build once, optimize everywhere solution due to the wide range of devices. That isn't to say that HTML5 isn't helpful, but it would be unbalanced to assume that avoiding native apps is always appropriate because of a misconception that HTML5 is completely compatible across platforms. So it's probably true that if you need to support a lot of platforms, you'll save money using HTML5 instead of native code, but it's definitely not correct to assume that it's always the case. And I've included a link to a blog posting here that I ran across recently that describes some of the potential shortcomings of HTML5. And if you're trying to decide whether you want to do native or HTML5, I'd recommend taking a look at that. How about transcoding? Transcoders are tools that can encode from one format to another. Some authoring tools are specifically meant to take one source and publish into a multitude of outputs for compatibility with a lot of devices. As an example, if you load a video to YouTube, then YouTube converts it into numerous formats, so it'll run on computers, phones, tablets, and even Nintendo Wii systems. Another example would be OnPoint Digital's Cellcast Solutions, which lets you start from PowerPoint and publish to lots of different mobile device formats, all from the same source. This type of transcoding can solve a lot of content presentation issues, but it's not very helpful for presenting high levels of interactivity where the screen size and layout really makes a difference. How about content type? This table shows another way to go about selecting tools for use for e-learning based on the content type. So, for instance, if you're going to develop audio content, you might use SoundForge. If you're going to develop instructional games, you might use Flash, Director, or Authorware. But you can't use this chart on its own because it only tells you if a tool is good at that type of content, not whether it's good for your delivery infrastructure. So you would note Authorware is quite an old tool and was used primarily for CD-ROM-based training. But I do find it interesting that tools like Authorware, which really didn't make the transition from CD-ROM to the web because they used too much bandwidth, but now I download apps that are larger in size than those Authorware packages were to my mobile device. So perhaps Authorware might be able to skip the web because it was too big, but make it back and potentially be used for mobile learning. How about learning standards? So you could also use learning standards to guide what e-learning tools you'd select. And mobile has caused a disruption here too. So historically, we started out with AICC tracking for CBTs, and that made the transition to web-based training to some extent before SCORM came in, and SCORM's JavaScript API replaced AICC, and it made tracking easier and work well for the most part, with the exception of a few technical places where it didn't work very well. For instance, tracking across domains where your LMS and your content were in two different domains. But a technical implementation of SCORM often relies on Java, which is not allowed on important mobile platforms. So what's coming next is called the Experience API, or likely you've heard the code name that was used during development, the Tin Can API. And this version has lots of improvements, one of them being that it works on mobile devices, another being that while SCORM was aimed at tracking formal learning almost exclusively, things like did I complete the course or what score did I get on the course, the Experience API is going to provide the capability to track other things like did I watch a video, did I contribute to a forum, did my manager assess that I can accomplish some task. And so people who are interested in the informal learning side of things are also excited about those capabilities of the Experience API. Now, I'm interested to hear if you've begun using the Experience API, aka the Tin Can API, to track users of your learning for any real projects yet. All right, so, 100% of the responses are no. And now, in this case, we're matching what I saw at my eLearning Guild presentation. Nobody there was able to say that they're using it yet either. But what we're seeing is that authoring tool vendors are adopting the Experience API very quickly. And the next version of Lectora and Articulate and Captivate, you're going to expect that by the time you download your next version or purchase your next version, they're all going to include that. But what's happening slower is the LMS vendors on the other side that need to receive the tracking data are not adopting as quickly. And I suspect the reason why is because our clients are already in long-term contracts with a particular LMS vendor, and they're going to be stuck there for a while anyway. And each LMS vendor needs to implement the receiving end of the Experience API, tracking the learning record store individually. And so it's going to take some time for them all to incorporate it. So what we're seeing our clients do is they're kind of in an analyzing mode right now, whether they decide, do I switch learning management systems to get to the Experience API, or do I keep the learning management system that I have, and do I set up a side system that collects this type of tracking data from my mobile devices, and then behind the scenes in the background keep the two in sync. I will note that to get from SCORM to AICC across a wide variety of our clients, kind of a 10-year undertaking. So even if this happens in a couple of years, that would be relatively pretty fast. All right, I've been talking a fair amount about choosing e-learning tools based on the limitations of certain platforms, but this assumes you know which platforms you need to support. So let's talk a little bit about how you determine this. So obviously you're going to need to develop mobile learning for the devices and operating systems that your audience has. If your company has developed mobile learning standards and the audience is only your employees, then it's obvious you just want to develop for the delivery platforms that match your standards. But what do you notice about the other three cells? So in the cases where your company has not developed mobile learning standards, or you need to reach partners, contractors, customers outside your organization, then you're going to have to match the platforms you expect your audience will have. And even if we fall back to this first category about your company standards, it may be that your company analyzed and decided that the standard was going to be bring your own device, in which case you'll still need to support multiple platforms. So this could have a significant impact on costs, because although there's techniques to mitigate it, developing for multiple platforms often requires more effort. The literature about bring your own device seems to suggest that employees are happier when they can use their own devices, but it actually costs the company more, even though they don't have to purchase the devices. And I've included a link here to an article from Learning Solutions magazine online that discusses the pros and cons of bring your own device in detail. Now, sometimes learning folks that I talk to don't show that much interest in this discussion about what's going to be the device standard for their organization, because they think, well, IT is going to make this decision anyway, I don't have any say. But even if you're not the decision maker, you're going to want to keep up to date, keep tabs what's going on, because as a learning content creator, it's going to affect you quite a bit. If you are developing for a known audience and you can set the standards, you could save on development costs. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you're seeing a part of our general learning infrastructure questionnaire that we use to find out about learning infrastructure for any given project that we're getting ready to undertake. On the left-hand side, the bullets are some factors to consider in your mobile learning standards particularly. So your operating system, is it iOS or Android or Windows or BlackBerry or something else? The form factor, is it a phone or a tablet or a phablet or all of these? The screen size. So even within a certain form factor, the screen size could vary widely. The input types. So the interface design would be very different if you're designing for a device that doesn't have a touch screen, or like we've done some for BlackBerry where they have a hard keyboard instead of a soft keyboard. And then your software installation restrictions, these might be enforced by the operating system, but maybe also by your organization. In the event that we do need to guess about the platforms that we think our learning audience will have, it's useful to have some general statistics. So this chart is showing within the United States the top 8 mobile operating systems over the last 2 years. And as you probably would expect, if you look at the end of last year, you end up with iOS and Android being at the top, with iOS having a slight lead over Android, and a lot of other mobile vendors being way down at the bottom. So at this time, in the absence of any other information, I guess I'd recommend you to choose one or both of these platforms to support if you're just having to guess about who you need to support, and then make that your minimum standard, and don't develop for things that don't fit in that standard. But if you're a global organization, it's important not to make the mistake of assuming that the rest of the world is the same as the United States. So now I have this chart looking at worldwide mobile operating system stats, again over the last 2 years, and you'll notice a couple of differences here. One, you'll notice that worldwide, Android has more market share than iOS. And secondly, you'll notice that in the last half of last year, Android was on a steep grab for more market share. Another thing you'll notice is that the Nokia Series 40 and Symbian OS have an appreciable size of market share, combined to almost 16%. And it looks like if you're looking at this chart that there was some kind of a drastic change in April, but that little triangle goes to a footnote that says it was just an accounting difference, and the fact that they were tracking Nokia Series 40 and Symbian together before and have split it into 2 separate ones now. All right, we already talked some about screen size, but this chart shows some other comparisons across phone and tablet form factors. And the check marks here are showing where smartphones and tablets excel. And again, we could insert phablets between smartphone and tablets. And over to the left here on the smaller size, we could insert smart watches to the left of phones. With these added, we're really moving towards a continuum of different features instead of a discrete breaking point at each level. And this is what I expect we'll see as more and more devices come out, really a continuum across where you can't really tell where phone ends and tablet begins. I do have a couple of links here, and this is one of the things I was excited about, forward-looking, the future of smart watches. This is a link to an article from the CEO of Qualcomm, who says that he thinks that smartwatches will likely be more valuable to the consumers of the future than augmented reality goggles like Google Glass. Now, I don't have enough info to predict if he's right or not, but he does make a kind of a compelling argument when he says that a product that's giving a high percentage of its customers a headache is pretty hard to sell. Then on the right, I have a link to a Wikipedia article about the Pebble Watch, which started shipping at the end of January. And what it does is it links to iOS and Android phones by Bluetooth and could do things like alert you of your phone calls, display text messages, and let you control the music on the linked device from the controls on the watch so that you don't have to take the device out of your pocket. This Pebble Watch gives you the capability to go into an app store and install new apps onto the watch itself. So that's pretty exciting from an innovation standpoint. I think the other news here is that there's rumors out there now that Apple is looking into releasing their own watch as well, their own smartwatch. So it'll be pretty cool to see what happens in this space. And I guess I've had some people say, well, do you think that this watch thing is really going to take off and it will amount to anything? And it's hard to say. You could easily look at it now and dismiss it and say, I don't see how that's useful. But by that same token, people used to say the same things about smartphones, but they weren't as capable as they are these days. All right, let's say that we've picked our operating system and our form factor and our target device. We still then have another very big question. Should we develop a mobile website or a mobile app? And this is significant for our authoring tool selection because we saw earlier that we might use different authoring tools if we select a mobile website or an app. So if you have iOS or Android, you could use our free ELearning Decision Maker app to help determine whether your learning solution is better suited to a mobile website or a mobile app. It will also help you determine whether a learning need is well suited to a mobile solution. And now I'm showing on our iPhone simulator what you'd see if you come to the ELearning Decision Maker app. So the first choice you'll get is your mobile solution right? Is a mobile solution right for your learning need? And then, is a mobile website or app best for your ELearning? Once you've decided it is a ELearning solution, if you have. And so it's just a series of questions that help take you through. Do learners need to access content without a connection to the Internet? And as I answer each question, I would be prompted with another question until finally I reach a result like this one that gives you a recommendation about app versus website. Okay, so that wraps up the points I wanted to make about mobile's impact on authoring tool selection. I want to talk now about the impact that cloud computing is having. So this is a note from Wikipedia that says that cloud computing is the use of computing resources that are delivered as a service over the network. They go on to say that there are many types of cloud computing, and they list in all of these. So it's hard to imagine that there would be any confusion about cloud computing, right? But I think this is really more than we need to be concerned about as learning content developers. And so I'm going to focus this in and narrow it down just a little bit. So for our purposes, let's focus on cloud computing as an authoring tool platform and a delivery platform to reach your learners. But I think it's important here that we not focus solely on formal training solutions. So I learned about this link and this chart from Joe Gansey, who was the opening keynote at the last eLearning Guild presentation. And it shows the top learning tools from 2012 as ranked by this survey. And if you look at this listing, or if you go to this link and look at the whole list, what you'll see is that the top tools here aren't things like we've been talking about, like Articulate and Lectora and Captivate. They're things like Twitter and YouTube and Google Docs and WordPress and Skype. So it leads me to the conclusion, and it really is interesting to me because I spent much of my life as a programmer in those formal authoring tools. But I think that on the informal side, if you're looking at informal learning, social learning, performance support, it's very interesting to look at the cloud-based tools as well. So I have another chat question for you. What are some of the benefits of cloud computing as an online authoring tool platform? What do you think? So someone says ubiquity, it's present everywhere. Someone says good for building learning communities. I definitely agree. Marcia says reach a broader audience. That's a good one. Karen says multiple people can access and upload content easily. Definitely a good one. Revisions could be easier. Use a public space to share info. Upgrades across the enterprise all at once. All good things. I'm going to show you some of the ones that I came up with. So more than one author can work in the tool at the same time is definitely a good one. Easy to connect to other online tools such as social media tools. Also, you can keep your infrastructure costs down by using a pay-as-you-go model. Now, let's look also at some of the drawbacks of cloud computing. Sometimes the online authoring tools are not as powerful as their desktop counterparts. So, for instance, some tools I use, they have both an online version and a download version, and so you can choose. So sometimes they're not as powerful, or other times they're not as efficient. In other words, you can do the same tasks, but it just takes longer to do them. It's slower when you're working through your web browser maybe than when you're working from the local version. And then you might also have the problem of hitting red tape. So you may just be blocked by gaining approval from your organization in order to use cloud-based services. And particularly if you're in a large organization, I can see that this might be a problem. In summary, the next steps listed here could help you prepare for changes in e-learning tools due to mobile device adoption and cloud computing adoption. So determine if your e-learning must support awareness, understanding, or skill. Determine what mobile devices and standards you'll support. Select the authoring tools and cloud computing tools you'll use and ensure your team has the skills to use them. But I'd encourage you to take this very strategically. So don't get caught up in the craziness and rush into a quick solution just to get something mobile out. Step back and assemble the right team, I'd say, to develop a mobile strategy that addresses the standards and processes and tools. So I hope that this slide deck will serve as a valuable resource to help you complete these steps. And I'm going to now conclude my formal presentation and take any questions that you might have. If you'll enter your questions in the chat panel, that'd be great. And if your question isn't answered today, or if you find that you have more questions or comments later, feel free to contact me by any of the methods shown on the screen. It looks like I have a couple questions already that have come in through chat, so I'll try to address some of those if I can. So I have a question. What about security related to cloud computing? So I think that's a very good question because there could potentially be more risk for things that are hosted on the cloud than hosted within your own organization. One of the things I see, though, in large organizations is that things that you think are hosted internally may be hosted already on the cloud. For instance, your IT may have outsourced your email to another provider, or your file sharing, like your FTP site sharing and things like that. So a lot of it may be already out there. The other thing is if you're in a very large organization and the services are distributed across a wide variety of places, it might not be that much secure either, or you may find that depending on your organization, maybe the whole IT department is already outsourced. So it's definitely something to be concerned about, but it's not necessarily less or drastically less because of being cloud-based instead of internal to the organization. Okay, some questions about the development of the apps that I showed. So the Using Gilbert's Model app and the ELearning Decision Maker app, both were built using the Flash authoring tool published for the native version, so they will run on iOS and Android. We have used a variety of different approaches to develop apps, including the HTML5 part embedded in native HTML5 for BlackBerry and Flash. We do like to use Flash at times because it carries over. We can use the same skill set that we've been using then to develop e-learning all along and get it into an app. I suspect, however, that if you want to do something more complicated inside an app, really interact with back-end service and things, you'll get more mileage out of an approach that doesn't use Flash. But if you want to do more of a simple content presentation, it's still a good tool to use. A question here, how can I contact the eLearning Guild? You can just go to the eLearning Guild's website. You'll find easily. And I'll just put a plug in there. I've been a member for a long time and have found it as an e-learning professional to be a great resource, and especially one that's good for people who are interested in getting their hands dirty into actually doing the authoring as well as just doing the instructional design. All right. It looks like we're starting to wrap up the questions, and I apologize if I've missed any, but certainly contact me. I'd be glad to continue the conversation with you. But I'm going to turn it over now to Seth.
Thanks, Matt. We want to thank all of you that have joined us here today. Our contact info is on the screen. We invite you to contact us with any additional questions, thoughts, or further comments you may have. Please remember to respond to the survey that you'll be receiving in a few minutes, and you'll receive these slides and the YouTube link here early next week. Thanks again, and have a great day.